Hey, today I just want to share some of what I've learned about parallel compression recently and how you can get some snappier drums, some beefier drums, or just a more audible bass line. Those things specifically using parallel compression. You can definitely apply the same thing to lots of other parts in your mix. Those are just a few of the things that I've been tweaking recently in my own workflow and wanted to share them here. Before we dive in, I'm Marcus of Cradle Cat. I make my own indie pop music, and that's out here on YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere else you would find music. And I also write and produce for other artists and share my process along the way here with you on YouTube. So if you like what you see on what I'm sharing with content, or if you like my music, go ahead and subscribe here on YouTube. Follow me over on socials as Cradle Cat on Instagram and any of my other socials that you might be on. Send me a message if you like the content. I'd love to hear from you. To get started, I've got a really simple loop set up here with some drums, a bass line, and a piano part that are very lightly mixed. And let's go ahead and take a listen to that to see what we're working with. The first thing that we'll do is set up parallel compression. So that's when, instead of applying a compressor directly to the track you're working with, you route a signal, a send, from the track you're working with to a bus and then apply the compression on that bus. So what that lets you do is treat that compressed signal completely separately, and then you can blend it back in. So we're going to do that here, starting with the kick. And I'll just put a new send in here. We'll just go to a new bus. We'll name this one parallel compression. And I think I might have a couple of those, so I'm just going to name it one parallel compression because I think that's in my template. On that new bus that we just created, I'm going to go ahead and put a compressor. And actually, before I even do that, I'm going to make sure I change this to stereo in case I were sending any stereo tracks to it. I'm not going to in this case, but just something to make sure you're doing there. If you're sending other tracks that are panned already, it's going to be helpful to have those this set as a stereo bus. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a compressor style here, just using the default Logic compressor. Usually I use a 76 style compressor on this part. You can experiment around, find the right color or lack of color that you want to use in that compression that you're getting. So to set up this compressor, first of all, no signals going in there yet. So what I'll do first is bump that send up to 0, just so we're getting the full signal going from our original kick track into our parallel compression bus. So now when we play it, you can see signal coming through there. Right now, it's really just making it louder. What I'm going to do is set up the compressor now to basically even limit the signal that's going through. So I always just crank the ratio way up, bring the threshold way down. We'll turn auto gain off here just so we can actually walk through it. So this is really just crushing the signal. I'll even put some distortion on there just to add some color. I'll bring the attack all the way down. And then I'll bring the makeup gain up so we can hear that more easily. So as I mess with the level of that parallel compression, you can hear that kick start to come up. I'm just gonna solo the drums here. So that's without parallel compression. That's with. And right now we're just making it basically louder, along with squashing the sound on that parallel compression track. The next thing that I'll do is add a EQ plugin here. And this is where I can sculpt the sound and really determine what I want to do with that compression. So the thing that I've been playing with more recently is On the EQ, what I used to do is actually kind of sculpt it like this, where I would high and low pass it, and just kind of add some like mid-range snaps that you're just hearing it a little more. So some of that mid-range of the kick is coming up more. And I would kind of blend it in like this. So you're hearing maybe a little more of that sustain of the kick. So without it, and then with it. And this is one way to do it. I'm going to add another channel EQ because this is something that I've been playing around with more recently, where instead of having it where I'm high and low passing it, this is kind of the more New York, Brooklyn style compression where you're actually going to boost those. And you could even kind of duck this too if you wanted to, in the middle a little bit. So I'll bring this back up so we can really hear it. So without any EQ, then we'll add it in. So that is just really making that kick quite a bit more thunderous. And this is not how I'd actually blend it in the mix, but just to show you having it louder there. And that's been a really cool way to any track that seems to just be lacking some punch or some of that like low end oomph, especially on the drums and the kick, and you just want it to push more. This has been a really cool way that I've been playing around with to add that kind of energy to the mix. So that's just on the kick right now. We're going to go ahead and the great thing about parallel compression is that we can route other instruments through that same bus. So the other really common one is routing the snare through it. So I'm going to add a send to my snare track, go to bus 20, that one parallel compression, and then I'll ramp this up so you can hear it as it blends in. So this is none, and then let's ramp it up. So that's a little too much. Let's kind of bring that back down and find a good range. But at that level, you can definitely hear all the sustain and the kind of after sustain of the snare as it's rattling out, and that becomes really present, especially since we boosted that high end. So actually, I'll leave it up here for a second. Let's swap those EQs back so that you can hear what's going on if I had stuck with the route where I'm kind of low passing it there, or high and low passing it. So let's compare those. So that's, again, just kind of the mid-range coming through. Let's swap it. So really snappy now, and I can play with this to bring a little more. Yeah, kind of bring some of that snap around. And the other thing that we can do is, in addition to the level of the overall parallel compression bus, I can start to look at the sends on the kick and snare individually on how much of that signal I'm sending to it. So it's sort of like a submix going into the parallel compression. So now let's listen with the other instruments, the bass and the piano, so we can hear in context what that sounds like with and without the parallel compression bus. I'll do it first with it muted. This is the original. And now let's unmute that. Great. So hopefully you can hear the difference there. It's really adding a lot of that low end and also just making it sound crisper because we boosted the EQ on the high end too on that parallel compression track. The next thing that we'll do is we'll kind of make this a rhythm section parallel compressor, where on my bass track, I'll add a send there to also go to the parallel compressor bus. And let's go ahead and blend that in and see how that affects the overall sound. So you can start to hear that bass really come up in the mix. Any of the lighter notes, the lighter hit or higher velocity notes, those are going to start to sound more even across your mix because you're pumping it through that parallel compression, which is making it all a little more, just taking down that dynamic range through that bus. The other thing you can do here is, I haven't really adjusted the original signal on any of these, but something that I'll often do is after I route things through the parallel compressor bus, I'll go back to the original track and mix changes there based on what new sound I'm getting from that parallel compression bus. So in this case, if we want that compressed sound from the bass coming through the parallel compression bus, I can go back to my original bass track here and I'll adjust the level of that to sort of compensate because we're adding so much volume on that parallel compression bus. I like that sound. I think I lowered the level there of the original bass track and have more of that signal coming through the parallel compression track. And that just gives a more even bass sound throughout the little loop here. And just makes it feel like it sits a little more consistently throughout that loop. So again, let's go ahead and listen back through. I'll turn on and off I'll mute and unmute that parallel compression bus so we can hear what it's doing, and just make a couple more comments at the end here to tie things up. Cool. So those are some things I've been playing around with recently. Again, especially on the sculpting the EQ of that parallel compression bus when I'm blending it back in with the overall mix. Again, these are things that you can play around with based on the sound you're trying to get. So, if I'm trying to make a certain track sound more consistent in the mid-range, then maybe I would use this high and low pass here on the parallel compression bus, make sure that there's a consistent signal coming through on that range through the mix, versus if I'm trying to add some of that beef and some of that snap, this more Brooklyn, New York City style compression is the one I've been learning about more recently and playing around with and starting to use in my own mixes, and adds a really cool beefiness and really ties together that rhythm section, especially if you run that bass track through the same parallel compression bus. So those are some things that I've been learning recently, and I feel like they've made some of my mixes better in the last couple mixes that I've done. hopefully they help you out on your project as well. So just to do a speedy recap again as how we set this up, we have our tracks, we set up a send to a new bus, put a compressor on there, really cranked that compressor, the threshold down in ratio so that it's giving us a ton of gain reduction, cranked the attack low. You can play around with that if you want a little more natural sounds to bring that up. I just left the release on auto, but somewhere I usually leave it kind of mid if I don't have it on auto. I also added some distortion to get that color to it. Played around with two different EQ options, high and low pass versus beefing up the low and bringing up the crispy highs there. And then walking through how we're blending the sends from any of the tracks or routing, which mostly that I'm using are snare, kick, and bass. Blending those sends to sort of make a submix going into the parallel compressor, and then blending in the overall parallel compression level using that level on the bus that we created. That's all I've got for you today. If you like this content and want to see more like it, or want to hear more of my music, or hang out on some of the live streams where I make a song from scratch, go ahead and subscribe here on YouTube. Drop a comment to let me know. And also, you can follow me over on Instagram, Twitter, or other socials, and would love to hear from you. Get a DM and just let me know that you're watching the content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.